All right. Got the microphone going. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Father.
So, I need someone to read for me.
I got you, Father.
You read last time.
You read last time. I'll let someone else read.
Me, Father.
What's that?
Me,
You want to read? I was going to let Guillermo read since he's leaving. Do you want to read?
It's up to him.
Let me have him read since this is probably the only time he ever gets to be on recording. So, do I have your full permission to... No, just kidding.
Oh, that's okay.
You have no choice. I'm kidding. You wouldn't. But just go ahead and... I'm covering that because I don't want you to read my notes.
Okay, so just
just say what reading we're reading today. We're doing the parable of the... gosh, I already forgot the name of it. The Dragnet. I'm not editing that out because it's funny. So just go ahead and read the parable for us, please.
Okay. All right. Week 5, the Dragnet. Gospel reading, Matthew 13:47-50. Theme is...
No, just read the gospel reading.
Okay. All right. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Matthew 13:47-50.
Okay. Thank you. I have to say on a side note, my dad's godfather, who passed away the week actually after my dad did, and their funerals were the same week, which is really interesting in that sense. But anytime he heard that in church, his name was Jim Brophy. Really loved the man, but he was cranky though when it came to serving. Though he served the altar, he was super cranky, but good man. In fact, actually, the wood cross that you see where he bought that for me after I was ordained. But every time he would hear gnashing of teeth in the gospel, he'd go gnashing. The way he said it was gnashing. I'm like, Anyway, just made me think about it. So thoughts, questions. What do you think about that? So, parable of the Dragnet.
It's kind of scary of a passage there.
It is a scary passage.
I think the weeping and gnashing of teeth line that keeps getting reused is pretty metal.
Pretty metal?
Well, not metal for those who are weeping and gnashing, I suppose.
Am I going to have to explain to people what metal means now? Because I know a lot of the lingo, but I don't know if I know what that means.
It means it's pretty cool, metal bands. So it's pretty hardcore.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Draconic, maybe.
Draconic.
I guess. For them, I guess.
Greg, you had a comment?
Well, just that passage always makes the distinction, I think, between Sheol or the underworld, as it is now and after judgment. The fire's eternal hell, right? So there's a distinction there.
Yeah. Let me ask this question to you guys. So, what do you think he means when he talks about good and bad fish?
Christians, non-Christians, specifically the righteous versus the evil.
Yeah, so, some would say that the fathers of the church go a little further on that, though. And they talk specifically about how the good and the bad fish are not those who were in the church and those who are out of the church, but just those who were in the church. So those who are within the church are good and those who are within the church are bad. What do you think they mean by that? Solely from the perspective of the church.
Maybe they mean I'm sorry.
No, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just telling you, I'll go to you next kind of thing.
Maybe they're talking about what was the phrase that you used, the Christmas, Easter, the CEOs?
Yeah.
Maybe they're talking about that, or the people that show up on Sunday, but they do absolutely nothing with their life. They don't try to evangelize. They don't try to at least fix themselves, do any good. They just I show up on Sunday and I take communion and I stand there for 2 hours and that's it.
Yeah, kind of those who go through the motions, right? That's sort of what they talk about. Like St. John talks about. He tends to emphasize it on lukewarm Christians versus those. That's not quite what I'm going for in particular. think a little bit deeper with regards to that. Like, with good fish and bad fish in the church. Like, let's just pull it back for just a second. So, the terminology of fish is used, okay? And we are looking at it as the church as the sea, right? And so, in the sea, there's obviously different types of fish throughout, right? And they all have their, just go look at any kind of pond or lake too, right? All different species of fish that all have different roles on the matter, right? And some of them, if you want to use this language, have evolved to be more advanced fish, while others are just simply like you got like crabs in the water, and then you've got, like little gullies, and they all like have little different business about them, right? Like obviously a crab can defend itself and can be a productive member of the greater part of the sea because it has more equipment, if you will, has pincers versus a little gully that literally just has its mouth, right? And a bigger fish is going to come up and will take it over, right? And so then eventually it has to evolve into something more if it wants to survive, right? That's at least the secular argument, right? But we're taking it from the church's perspective here and saying, what does that mean here with the parable? Like, what does it mean in the sense of the church? Like, yes, we have those people who are lukewarm and those who are, we use the term often as hyperdox, right? But that's not what we're going with here. We're not going for hyperdox versus, barely dox. We're going a little bit different. I'm trying to approach it a little bit different in this sense. Jesse?
I think the difference between the good fish and the bad fish are those in the church who truly love God and those who either strictly hate him or are just indifferent to him, and like in the way that they're not what word God is giving them isn't like enticing them to make change in their life. You know what I mean?
Right. So, yes, in a sense, but it's really where I'm going with this, and where I want you guys to see on this is actually an illustration of community, internal community. So what do we have in this community? Just people in general. Like, what kind of people do we have in this community? I'm not saying, like, don't tell me people's sins or such like that, but, like, the makeup of the community, not, like, any particular person, but sort of, I'll give an example, right? We have a choir, right? We have a choir director. We have a deacon, like, we have a priest. We have a retired priest. Like, what else do we have in this community?
You mean vocation-wise?
Everything. Everything. What does it take to make up a church?
We've got to have lay people.
Lay people. And what do they do?
They're serving the church by being congregants and being members of the community.
Parish council.
Parish council, right?
You gotta have an accountant.
Mm-hmm.
Most churches would have that as security. I mean, we're just talking about vocations.
Right. So there's different roles now. Do you think, let me ask this question, do you guys think that there are people who come to church who embody some of those roles, but yet they weren't qualified or prepared for them? And don't say it's me, that the one who embodies the priesthood is not prepared. Because I'll be the first to tell you, yeah, it's probably me. It is me, right? I don't feel like I'm ever prepared for anything, even if I spend a whole week and such like that, like I did with this, and spend hours and hours preparing, I still don't ever feel like I'm prepared. Right? But I mean, like, do you think there are people who, in the church, and we're not naming anybody, that's why I'm being very careful with what I say here, because I don't feel like we suffer from this. When I'm talking about the church in general, are there people who come into church with an agenda? That's the better question.
I would say so. Like, I'm not naming anybody at our parish because I'm going to be honest, I think our parish is rock solid. But like across the church, as a unanimous body, I think there are people that have their own agendas they're trying to push.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, and I have to be careful because I don't but at previous parishes, there were definitely like the clique of gossipy old ladies, and that's what they were interested in.
That's where I'm going at with that.
Yeah.
Some of that, right?
Yeah.
Every parish suffers from these things, right? There's a dynamic to the church. And the reason I wanted to talk about it this way, right, is particular because I mentioned on Sunday how I was reading a little bit of St. Cyril of Alexandria, and that kind of gave me the idea of doing this parable this week. It's because St. Cyril makes this comment of saying this: the net gathers all kinds because the call of the gospel knows no distinction of persons, but the good fish are those who, having heard, live by faith and virtue, and the bad fish, who have for the nature of the present time endure evil and walk away. I mean, I summarized the last bit because I don't want to read this whole line, but it's an interesting thing, right? The good fish, having heard, live by the faith and virtue, and the bad ones walk away. Which is an odd thing to say about fish, because fish can't get up and walk. But, what does that mean in terms of the church, though? Like the community? Because we've talked about this, how important this class is as a tool for evangelism and teaching people how to evangelize. That's ultimately what these sessions of the parables are. Like, in other words, what I'm saying is, now Nate makes a comment saying this is a pretty rock solid parish. I can tell you right off the bat, no parish is ever rock solid. There's always issues, there's always dynamics, right? So how does the community make sure, though, that the image of that is that they're rock solid? That the people are there who are truly there for the right reasons, right? Are we a community that is seen out in the world as, oh yeah, you know what, I'm not going to name any jurisdiction, okay? But there are certain arguments that can be made about certain jurisdictions where you look at them and go, they are Orthodox churches, but those people in that parish are only Orthodox. Those people only care about their church and build up their church only for their own little community. They want to be their little club, their little social club, and they don't care if people join the church. And in fact, they'd be perfectly happy if people never did join the church, as long as they kept their community going, right? They use this term of diaspora, right? They live in diaspora means that they're separated from their homelands, but that they have basically embraced diaspora. Right? How do we as a community, and how do we teach people and tell people, let them know, that we as a community are not one of those types of churches, right? Like, that's the real question. That's where I was leading at with all this, because when we talk about community and things like that in the church, in the parable, we hear about how there's good fish and there's bad fish that are in this greater part of the sea, and the fathers talk about it in different types of manner of them existing into that. Now they take it a little bit further, right? There's the whole judgment aspect of it, where it's like, it could really be seen as a reflection of, if you're not personally right, and your mindset isn't following the faith, like St. Cyril said, and you haven't embraced it like that, then the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to walk away. You're going to be, you're essentially forcing yourself, you're putting yourself away from God, right? In other words, like we hear what the fathers talk about, how, salvation really boils down to the glory of God is present either way. You're either radiating in the light of Christ, or you're and the joy of God through the way they use the imagery of the sun, where the sun can give you light, but it also can destroy you, right? The sun's a very important thing. It does that, right? We use that language. And they've used that language, right? There's that aspect of this gospel, which is really kind of what it's talking about in that sense, right? But I want to take it to the further step of focusing really on the community part of it, because how does a community prevent itself from essentially being a social club? How does the church prevent itself from that? How does it become a place where people can, from the outside, and this is where I'm really asking the question, how do we set ourselves up as a community that people can come from anywhere in town, anywhere on the planet, and feel like there's a home here, that this is the church? That's really what the question is. How do we show them that the good fish are, that that this parish is made of a good, healthy, community, and it's not made up of people with ambitions and people, and when I say ambitions, I mean like their own ambitions, right? We all have ambitions in this parish. We all have an agenda in this parish, right? My agenda is pretty clear. I want to grow this church to 500 people. And then when we're done to 500, we go to 1,000. And then when we get 1,000, we go to 2,000, right? I have an agenda in that sense. But, how do we as a community reflect that aspect so that people can feel like You know, because if you have 500 people in the parish, that's 500 people, that's a lot of people to keep them, you know, under control. For a priest to say that, right? So how do you make sure that those people coming in come in with the right mindset? How do we have good fish instead of, you know, because the thing about it is like, really what I'm asking is how do we limit, because this is, let me pull back for just a second, because this is a big question often gets asked or discussed among clergy and stuff when they're talking about their parishes, is things like, how do I take care of the people I have so that they don't fall into the gnashing of teeth category, that they don't end up being bad fish, right? I feel like sometimes I'm so overwhelmed I can't take care of all of them, right? You know, how do you run into that? How do you deal with that issue? What do you do in terms of kind of internalizing the community so you still have a healthy community despite all of that? You get what I'm saying with that? So I'll leave it open and then I'll ask another question. But Nate, you wanted to say something?
I would say one way, like from the outside looking in, so that way, you know, when people see, is to live and embody hospitality.
Yes.
Okay. Live and embody hospitality, Jesse?
Oh, no, I was pointing to the hospitality neighborhood.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say something.
I think on that same train of thought, you know, we can argue theology or try to prove our points using history or reason or any other the tools that we have to try to win someone over to orthodoxy for the right reasons. But I think one thing that people are hurting for in the world right now, especially, is like a sense of connection and a sense of community. And when you have that, I mean, the Orthodox Church absolutely has that, you know, when it's functioning as a community at its best. So I think having more, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use, activities isn't it, but
Exposure, maybe?
I don't even know that it's exposure. It's just that when we're all living Orthodox, not arguing Orthodoxy, but when we're being that example of Orthodox, because you know, Father's not going to be able to pastor to everyone at all times, especially if you've got 500 people. You know, it gets tough. But you know, just when we're able to shine that same light of Christ and being welcoming to other people, and they're looking for that connection, that's bringing them in for they're coming for the right reasons, they're staying for the right reasons. Maybe my thoughts aren't formative enough here.
No, but I want to jump in on something you just said, right? Because my question was essentially, how do we get them to stay for the right reasons? How do we get them to stay? You know, like, we're called to bring all fish into the church, right? And the church represents the good and the bad, those who have positive, who want to do good and want to be part of this body, and then those who will come in again with that agenda, you know, and such like that we're warned against, you know, also at the same time realizing it's not going to go anywhere, right? That really, I'm almost asking this question of, how does the church make sure it continues to brand itself the right way? You know, it's really easy to kind of, you see this, I'm sure at your work, and I won't say it because I won't get you in trouble, but you know, like, you're often probably talking about things like how, you know, there's assumptions made on everything. In particular, like, you know, you'll look at one group and go, that group, everything fits. You know, they automatically get put into every category because they are one part of that group, right? And same thing can be said of the church, right? Like, people will say things like, I hear this all the time, where someone will say, you know, there's a lot of people going to Orthodoxy because they're conservative, right? And there's a lot of people leaving the Episcopal Church because they're too liberal, right? And they're putting them into those categories,
Right.
and they're almost attaching agendas to those churches instead of just being the church.
Sure,
Yeah.
I've experienced it firsthand when I tell people, well, I converted in 21. They're like, oh, you were in the wave of like Twitter ortho bros then. And like, no, I started my inquiry in 2013. That was the time. But people make those assumptions.
Right.
And people attach presumptions to things.
So how do we, so the question is, you know, is how do we, as a community, make sure that people know what the presumptions are coming in. Like what our presumptions are. Because our presumptions are very clear, right? Your agenda never comes through that door, right? Our agenda is to what? Preach to all nations. Be the church. Heal the souls. Bring people in. The church, is very, one of my professors in seminary, Father John Baird, who was the dean at the time I was there, he would make this one comment one time in patristics where he said, that when you hear about the universalism church, right, the one that preaches some of the weird sort of every church is equal and all that kind of stuff, he's like orthodoxy is universalism, but he doesn't say we're preach universalism as a heresy, right? You could easily say, well, he just called us like them. That's not what he said. He said we're universal because we're the all-encompassing, place where the kingdom of heaven is literally at, right? For people to come and walk through the doors and see, there's the kingdom of God. I am here. I'm not in, I'm not down the street at the grocery store, praying, or whatever, doing my grocery shopping, living a life or whatever it is. I'm in the church itself, where I'm outside of the world. I'm in that body. But he also even says that it's universal in the sense that everybody can come to that. That nobody is left out in the sense of it, right? If somebody walks through those doors right now, we had some visitors with us, right? That walk through those doors. Now, I don't know much about them, but I could gather some things about them. I'm not going to say, too much in any way. I'm nothing bad about it, but there was, I'll just say it for the sake of it. One of the people that walked through the doors earlier when we had a visitor was a female who had green hair. And obviously, people already can assume, right? She's probably in that camp of things, right? But we would look at her and go, glad you're here, right? You're welcome to be here, right? How do we portray that? They didn't stay for the class, unfortunately, which was sad, but how do we make sure that they stay for the class? How do we get those people? It's one thing for us to bombard, hey, come on in, right? But that can push people away too, right? How do we be the church? How do we, understanding that everybody's welcome here, be the church without people coming in with preconceived notions of, I can only go here if I lean up this way politically, or I believe this type of thing, right? When you become Orthodox, you have to believe everything the Orthodox Church says. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You can't sit there and go, I'm Orthodox, but I don't believe that Mary was a virgin. Too bad. Sorry. When you get baptized, you have to acknowledge that, right? Even if you struggle with it. But I'm not saying anyone here does or I do, but I'm just using that as an example. But those who come out with all the craziness of the world, how do we make it where it's they see that the good fish live here? This is the place that you want to be if you want to be part of that. Or rather, do you want to live in the world?
I think we've already kind of touched on this, and it's when I think about perspectives of organizing, obviously my paid job is also to be a community organizer, so it's interesting because I try to carry over some of those skill sets, and I think my primary vocation as a Christian and trying to be a citizen of heaven is to try to also build a church. And I carry over some of those lessons. Mm-hmm. And I would say anyone who's interested in building the church, there's 2 books that I've read. I'm reading one now called The New Great Commission. I don't remember who wrote it, but it's about expanding the Orthodox Church in America. And then there's another book that I read called Dedication and Leadership by Samuel Hyde. I think his name was Douglas Hyde, not Samuel Hyde.
Not Samuel I think I'm going to leave that in. I'm just going to put it as one of the hashtags. Just randomly
Douglas Hyde. Sorry, I'm too online. Douglas Hyde. Dedication and Leadership by Douglas Hyde. He was a union, a Marxist union organizer in London.
There's a keyword I'm going to throw in there.
Yeah.
That should be the title.
Ironic.
Father talks about Marxism.
Something catchy.
But he converted to, he had a moment and he converted to Roman Catholicism. Mm-hmm. So he started to reframe his same community organizing skill set.
Sure.
To build the Roman Catholic Church. I guess nobody's perfect, but who's trying? But
there's something there,
yeah,
right?
there's something there. But I guess where I'm going to this is one lesson I always took from all this is give someone a title and get them involved. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually giving them a title, but everyone's bringing something when they're coming to be a part of a community. We're coming to be a part of one community. So, find out what skill or something that they could be doing to help serve that points toward Christ. Because if they feel like they're involved and they're taking like an active membership in the community, not just coming and sitting here. So providing those opportunities, however we can, to figure out how to activate people.
That's an interesting, way to look at it. So my question originally was, how do we make sure that people come in here and see this is the kingdom of God? All are welcome, and that they're not seeing the bad fish, rather that they are, part of this, leaving all those things up to God, and leaving those things out. Sorry, let me correct myself. Leaving those things out in the world and coming to God and being a living, being an example in that. And your statement on the matter is it's simple. Integrate them in the community. Make them a part of the community. Don't just say, okay, use the example of you two in the front, right? You're new catechumens, and what did I do before you technically even made you catechumens? Or at least Jesse, I think I made you the week before. What did I make you do last week?
I'm drawing a blank.
Go down to St. Paul's and work the Greek.
I volunteered.
Right, I made you do something immediately,
Yeah.
right? Didn't really hesitate. That's kind of what you're talking about a little bit.
Purpose.
With that, you throw, because I think that's where. Let me just say one thing, and then on the matter is purpose. That's an interesting kind of issue there. Not issue, but like phrase or word there, because people seek out orthodoxy partly because they're struggling. They're really in a downtrodden. They feel like they want to do good, but they just don't know what it looks like. But really, what they're seeking out is purpose, right? I like to tell people that I'm not sure to say I like it. Not that I like it, but I tell the story with regards to this part. I like to say, but I've noticed that we always talk about the world as like. And I've talked about this previously about relativism and how relativism is a big aspect of the world, and such like that. But I think what people often tend to ignore is that we have always latched on to community in one way or another. It's just now we latch on to community from a very hyper subculture focused mindset. We are really big on our subcultures, right? Every group kind of has its subcultures. And this is the part I like to tell is like when I was in high school, at the end of high school and going into college, like I was really into the fantasy world of video games like Final Fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't do any of the occult parts that people accuse. There's nothing occultish about it, right? Shameless plug to our Pathfinder group on every other Saturday night, right? After Vespers, come to Vespers and stay for the class or for the group. But I was really into that, right? And so what I ended up doing eventually, I got involved into Renaissance reenactment and something like that with the Las Vegas Ren Fair, and then got involved with a group called the SCA, also known as the Society of Creative Anachronism, right? And that was I really got a lesson in subculture, because that's a subculture. That's a big time subculture, because people shape their entire identities around that subculture. And when I say they shape their identities around that entire subculture, I'm not talking about like, oh, you know what, when you get home from work, you get on there and you work on your armor, and then or whatever this project you're working on, and then that's your thing you're going to do this weekend. I'm talking about people like refuse to be called anything but the names that they created for themselves in that. And I don't think there's anything wrong if that's part of the kind of the world you're in. And there's something wrong about it, obviously. But I meant if that's your hobby and you want people to call you that name while you're at that hobby, fine. And that's part of the whole fun of the game. But you have to remember the game stops at a certain point. And there's many people in that organization and stuff like that that doesn't stop. It's like that is their entire world. That is their entire identity. And I have some very good friends I've made over the years being involved with the SCA and stuff like that. And I love those people to death. I don't agree with a lot of the things that they say and do now, especially considering how how kind of insane politically the group has become. But, and I say insane, I mean really insane, right? But the subculture, right? It gave a lot of people purpose. It gave some people. I noticed some people that were in there that like had nothing going on in their lives, absolutely nothing. Like some of the worst things, like they were into drugs, they had alcohol problems, they had no family, and this gave them a home. This gave them something to look forward to, right? I also will say this on a side note for our video game, fans here. Like I have a real tough time with open world games, like in the sense of I can play an open world game for a while, but I like try to do everything.
It's too much.
And not do the main story. Because once I play the main story all the way through and I get to the end of it, I'm done. I can't play the game anymore, right? It takes me years to go back and replay a game. Or sometimes I don't even finish it. There's like a ton of video games on my shelf that like I have save files of where the final battles of those games, right? But I'm saying that in the sense of like when you lose that, like that feeling when you get to the end point, you kind of feel like you lost your purpose, and so then you got to find something new as a purpose. And I'm saying that in particular because the subculture aspect of community, right, gives people purpose, right? The SCA gave a lot of people I knew purpose. It gave them something to do more than just, this is a thing I hang out with a few friends with, it gives us more. And we have that with everything. We have lots of people. There's those who get online and make a whole online community, their purpose, right? And we have people that go and they join other types of things, people that join, sports leagues and stuff like that. They're like community leagues, or those who even, you hear this often with athletes too, right? When they retire from the sport, they don't know what to do with their lives. So like when Tom Brady was retiring like for the 50th time kind of a thing, it was the whole, like, they were like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't know. He was trying to keep it going. Brett Favre was the same way, right? He wouldn't go away. It's because he wouldn't know what to do with himself. That was his entire world, right? And when you've done something for so long in that way, it's really hard to like do anything other than that, right? Because you've been engrossed in that. Even a job, right? They say oftentimes a lot of times when people retire from a job, when they get older, right? They die.
Yeah.
Like they'll get to the age of retirement and then they die right after they retire. It's because they lost all their purpose, right? But the church is a sort of an interesting thing on that because that purpose is like a completely different type of purpose. The church isn't a subculture. The church is actually the culture. The church is what's supposed to be the culture, right? The early church, they didn't go around and start saying, your culture is bad. What did they do in that time frame? They didn't say the culture was bad, but what did they do with the culture that was bad?
Converted.
They converted it. They changed it, right? Like we have all these traditions and stuff like that come around that people will say things like, "Well, that was pagan, that was satanic." It's like, no, actually, your idea of pagan and satanic are completely wrong to begin with, because these people didn't see it as pagan and satanic. They saw it as what they did, their customs. Like you're going to hear people in a few weeks' time talk about Christmas trees and how it's some pagan thing, right? And the Christians took it and they took a pagan thing and they made it, they still were pagans, but it's like, no, they didn't see pagan as a religion when they took that. And the pagans themselves did not see it as a religious thing. That was like the equivalent of saying, yeah, I like so-and-so sports team for them, right? Or they were some ethnicity, that's having to do what they were, right, Craig?
My perspective on this has always been it would be a metaphysical perspective, but
Speak a little louder.
I don't know if this would be a metaphysical perspective, but whenever I've heard that, I've always said, is that not an example of the fact that Christ has conquered, Christ continues to conquer paganism?
Yeah. No, that's where I was leading at with this. That's exactly where I was going with this, right? That we, through Jesus Christ, conquer and
these things are all reoriented toward
reoriented, right? And that's where we get back to the whole thing of the church being universal, but that's also back where we get to the idea of, really what we're talking about is essentially, what do I always say in church?
You're always welcome.
You're always welcome, right? To foster a good community, to foster all of that, is to understand that the subcultures out there exist, that people out there exist in this sense. And how do we combat that? Well, we give them purpose. We give them a true purpose. You bring them in, you immediately say, okay, this is what this is the commitment you make, right? I tell those who become catechumens, I say, look, like you're now a student, right? And I give them that sort of distinction, saying you're a student, right? And now I expect a lot more out of you, right? And for those who, I'm going to assume the two of you here, and actually Bree too, I keep forgetting you're a catechumen. Feels like you've been a catechumen forever, but not really. But like in that email that I sent out that says in there like what you're expected, right? And I'm assuming the three of you have read it. Yeah?
Yep.
Yep.
Have you? It's okay. You're only lying in church. Just kidding.
Your phone made a noise, by the way.
What's that?
Your phone made a noise. I don't
That's
know
okay.
if that was the recording or whatever.
No, we're good.
Okay.
We're all good. Just
It sucked. And it just stopped.
Deacon texted me. I'll talk to him afterwards. It's not important. Anyway,
Sorry.
and I think it's not important. But in there I say don't just be someone who comes to church. Don't just be someone who reads, right? Get involved in every aspect of it, right? And stuff like that. If you can do something that, like clean up the church after Sunday, or you can help out with like coffee hour, like immediately gross yourself into that. Don't just say, okay, cool, I'm Orthodox, now I'm going to say prayers for a few, for the next whatever reason. I'm a catechumen, so I'm just going to say prayers and come to liturgy, and we'll see where things go. I say, like, you got to do more than just that. You have to be the purpose. It has to be that. And that's really kind of the whole thing about it is that the church has survived, and I hate to use the word survive like as though, it wasn't going to survive. I mean, obviously Jesus said it was going to survive, but that's not what I'm saying, right? But the thing that has helped the church grow has been this idea of understanding what's going out there in the world and saying, look, we catch all of it, and then we make it good. And we make it more, right? The net is put out there, it brings in a whole bunch of different types of people, and then we make it good. We give them what they need, right? They think they need this, but we give them what they need. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I'll take a couple of quick questions and stuff like that. But I would say to you, there's an interesting movie. I don't know if anyone has ever seen this movie. I've quoted this before in homilies, but has anyone ever seen the movie Weatherman? With Nicolas Cage?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's a scene in that movie, and I always say this as a disclaimer. When I recommend movies, I don't mean go see the movie because of the whole movie, because there's obviously stuff that, in most of our type of media, that's questionable. So I don't endorse the movie. Just want to make that clear, because there is some stuff, like there's some inappropriate, sexual stuff in the movie with regards to his character, because he's a drunk in the movie, okay? And he's got a lot of problems, and so he does some stuff that we wouldn't consider appropriate as Orthodox Christians. But there's a line he says in the movie that's really kind of an important one, right? When we set all the other stuff aside, where he talks about fast food. And he talks about it in the sense of like, there's no nourishment in that. Sure, you get fed, it feeds you for a moment, but it never really nourishes you, right? You just go and you get it, and especially in our culture now, right? Where we can easily go like, right now, I could end the recording and we could go down to Wendy's down the street and get ourselves whatever it is. Like it's nothing, right? And it was more so, we have a culture that encourages, don't worry about it, we'll find a way for you to pay it, right? Maybe a credit card. We'll make sure it's easy for you, and we'll put you into all this mindset of like, you never have to be accountable for anything in that sense, Whereas the church says, it's not how it works. This is the nourishment. This is where it's at, And then he talks about in the movie, he talks about it being fast food and how that never gives you any nourishment. But the thing I wish he would have done in that is I wish he would have taken it to the next level and talked about like a good steak or something like that, right? Where that gives you more, right? And that you should yearn for that, and you should try to go after that. And even in the sense of that, right? The world is perfectly satisfied with the fast food. But they are hungry for the steak. They want the steak. They want to be caught up. They want to be brought in. And Craig said it great. He said it beautifully in the sense of, you got to give them purpose. How do you take the fish that come into the church and make sure that they are even those who are bad fish, even those who come with agendas, well, you find a way of giving them all purpose, and you give them purpose in the right direction. So what does that mean for you guys? What do you think that means for you guys? Like, that's one thing for the priest to say that, oh yeah, the priest can bring people in. What does that mean for you guys? How can you guys do that? And how can anybody do that? Right? Other people, those who will listen to this later on, if they haven't turned it on by now, how can they do that? Those who are Orthodox, those who are not Orthodox, how can they become part of that? That's the question I will leave with you guys. And I want to hear a few answers, and then we'll end it there. But how can you do that? How can you give people purpose and those who come in as good and bad fish? The good fish are easy, right? I call those the ones who just buy in on day one, the easy ones. But the bad fish are the ones that are kind of the harder ones. But even the good fish have to be given purpose too, right? Like when my wife came into the church, the third date we were dating, she was all in. I didn't do nothing. Easiest conversion on the planet, She immediately had purpose because she was given, the task of helping out with coffee hour. That's an example right there, But that was something that Father John gave her. What is something that you guys could do in that sense? That's really what I'm asking, Jesse.
Not specifically towards what you just asked, but I had a thought a while back, is that one of the things that attracts the people to the Orthodox Church is, I think it's the sense of willing humility, where it's just like you see this working for other people and you see them living this lifestyle of assisting others, and you go, well, I want what they have, but they look like it gives you the purpose of pursuing that, you know what I mean? And getting into the attitude of being sort of servitude out of love towards others.
So your response to that, essentially, I'm going to rephrase it in this sense, is how do you give people that purpose? Your answer would be essentially, be an example of the church.
Exactly.
Live the faith. Be Orthodox. Be Orthodox, but be forgiving, be charitable, be loving, not judgmental, right? Mm-hmm. Somebody disagrees, you forgive, you ask, you pray, in the sense of it, you may falter, but you try to live what the church commands you to live, right? You come into church, you see someone, who needs a chair, you give up your spot, kind of a thing. I know that's a silly one on that one.
I saw those people come in and I paid for their candle for them and just passed them it. Because
right.
I thought, it's going to be too much of a hassle for them. I just want them to have a good time here and enjoy it. And know that people are, like, you walk right in and someone's already doing something for you, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, catechumens have to pay twice, right?
No.
It's double the price until you're, I'm just kidding.
I almost believed you. Like, he is serious, isn't he?
No, but it's 3 times for him, so.
Oh, yeah. You see that?
Anyway, but no, okay, so that's one aspect. Living the faith is like being an actual, right, good fish. Someone who is an example, right? Those people who we like to say are living saints, if you will, right? Being one of those, right? That's one way. That's one way of doing it, and that's a very good way, because you want to know something? I'll say this, right? That's probably the vast majority of people in the church who can do that, right? Not everybody can come into the church and sing in the choir. Not everybody can come in the church and sweep the church. Not everybody can come and serve in the altar, right? Obviously, not everyone can serve in the altar, but not everyone can get that level of involvement, So simply ourselves living the faith, being an example of that, right? I would say this to your comment is one thing I noticed when I was in Colorado was one thing I noticed about Holy Theophany in Colorado Springs, the church that was in town, the town next to ours, was a lot of the people there fully 100% braced and bought in, and that was one of the aspects of their growth, because they were living the faith. They were coming to services, extra services. I mean, gosh, we would have a deanery, meeting, have divine liturgy on a random Thursday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there'd be 100 people in church. Right, and these were people who made it a point to take off time from work, who made it a point to even, although a lot of kids nowadays, especially in Orthodox circles, it seems like they're homeschooled, but the ones that were not homeschooled, those kids were coming out of school, And and it wasn't, oh, mom's picking me up from school because I get to get off from school thing. It was like, no, you go to school because church is more important. Like, or you get off of school because church is more important, right? And they believe they were part of that. Like, it made it more of who they were, right? And that was something that was really a strong part, and really to this day a strong part of that community, is that those people put the church first in everything. They want to live that. And you know what? Others around them have seen that, right? Because the people there when they first came were that way. And then they live like that, and others see that around them. And I always tell people this all the time. I say, if you want to get people around you to change, if you're not like, Craig and Nate are very good at speaking to people, right? They can get out there and they can be salesmen, and that's their talent. We'll talk about the parable of the talents in a couple of weeks' time, right? Like, they're really good at that, But I look at someone like Brian, I know for a fact you're not that. There's nothing against you, right? Guillermo can say the same thing. You're not that either. Luke, you're not that either. Jesse, I'm not so sure yet. The jury's still out on you, But not a bad thing, but right, like you guys are not going to be out there going, like, come to church, right? You're the vast majority of people in the church, right? You have to just be that example. You have to say your prayers. You have to be, be helpful. You have to offer things like, a little bit of service and stuff like that. So we're putting in the bulletin this week for this weekend that someone had asked me was, can we re-energize our St. Bridget thing and have people just bring a can once a week and stuff like that? So for this, for the Manor House, so that people can have stuff for Thanksgiving, right? Like, those are little things that people can do, right? That will draw people and show them, hey, giving them purpose in that aspect. One second, you're giving them purpose in that one aspect, but also you're understanding that not every single person out there can get up there with a ton of energy and say, hey, you know what? Like, come on into church. Like, I got this parish I go to, or in our jobs. Because that's a hard thing, right? Especially with today. Like, it's hard to do that, because unfortunately, every other religion on the planet can do that, but we can't, okay? Because we have the risk of getting fired. They don't. That's a whole conversation in itself. But, right, we can live that. And people will be interested and want to, see that, Now, to take this so we don't go too on it, Craig, you had something to say.
It was a sidetrack.
Okay. So then, just simply living the faith is one way. What's another way of giving people purpose in the church? And it can be part of the living the faith. But what else?
I was going to say taking the initiative and giving yourself a job, but that doesn't really, what I mean?
How does that work for getting people?
That's what I meant. It's not really.
Well, it does in the fact that we can always sit here and come up with lists of other functions that we can do as a community to serve, right? To serve like the wider community. And when you start coming up with different, I just use the word activism, different forms of activism that we can do, that's where people will say, well, I'm not good at, maybe this part of the task. Like, let's say we opened up our own, like, pan-Orthodox food bank on the Georgia coast. And we had to put together all these different tasks for it. It's like, well, I'm not good at, like, I don't know, building a website, but so-and-so is. But what I do have are a lot of relationships with farmers down the coast that I can, I'm just giving you an example here of like how you would do this, how you would grow.
So I'll take over here for a second because I see where you're going with this, but I'm going to take over a little bit. It's okay. So I'm going to say it in this sense of like, so the first purpose is live the faith, be an example of what the faith looks like to others. The second one is, this is a big one with me, really big one with me. Ministry. A lot of people, and I'm not going to call anybody out in particular, I promise. A lot of churches, and Orthodox churches, I feel like are some of the most guilty of this. They see ministry as almost like external ministries or ministries the parish do, as either that's too much work, there's not enough money in the budget to do that, and that's just not what we do. Those type of three things. I think those are all terrible arguments, by the way. When I hear that, I go, oh, sorry. you're wrong on all counts, you know. 3 strikes are out, season's over, you know. But I also understand from the perspective of why they make that argument. Why do they make that argument? Well, because it's hard, for one, you know. But I also think that I've noticed just in this sense of, you know, I've read a lot of things that are outside of the church and stuff like that, because I grew up, my dad raised me to say you should always look. He was just as a military guy, he basically approached Sun Tzu, Art of War, with know your enemy sort of thing, right? Know who you're dealing with, know their arguments, know what they are doing and saying, right? And that way you're better equipped to it, right? Like, no lawyer walks into a courtroom and argues a case without knowing what the other side's going to do, right? That's one of the reasons they have a whole thing called discovery, so they can know what the other side's going to do, so they don't get curveballs thrown at them, right? And both sides play it. Now, of course, sides like to hide things. That's not the point. But you need to know how they're thinking so that you can properly see the things and have a stronger argument in your sense, right? So an example of this is kind of what Craig talked about with like a food pantry, right? I've always believed that we should take, if somebody else does something, like let's say Protestants, for example, those mainstream Protestants, they're really, really, really good about marketing. They will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a church budget just to market their parish, right? I look at that and go, why does not every single Orthodox church have a marketing budget? An actual marketing budget in their line item budget? Like, one of the things, and it's no secret, I've told this to Ron and a few others in marriage, I'd like to at some point in time have it where the church actually has a real marketing budget, where I'm not using my company to kind of supplement that. It actually has a real one, right? Because that's a very important thing. You know, if we have money to spend on those kind of things, we can put out advertisements and stuff like that. What's wrong with doing that? Nothing. Now, those who argue would say, yeah, that's a problem. They don't want to do that. I think they're afraid. They're afraid they get too many people. I don't know what it is, or that's what the others do, right? And I think they use it as an excuse, you know. But like, that's an example. Why can't we do stuff like that? Why can't we? You know. And the same thing goes with ministries. You know, if we've started this extra adult class every evening, right? Most churches just have one adult class. You know, why can't we have something every single day going on? Now, can we do that right now? No, we're not there yet. But we can have the mindset that we can get there. You know, I can tell you right off the bat, if you go to some of these big mega churches down all over the country and stuff like that, they have stuff going on all day long, all the time. And some of you who've come from those backgrounds would probably, you know, Luke's nodding his head. I'm sure you've seen them, right? They have stuff going on all the time, right? And you know what? They also have 5,000 members. Why do they have 5,000 members? Because they gave people something. They gave them a subculture. World is what it was. They gave them something that would feed them and nourish them. They didn't turn out and find out that that's not going to nourish them long term, whereas we can nourish them long term, right? But we can use their own stuff against them. And that's not to mean like we're their enemy, but rather like, why can't we have activities all the time? You know? No, I understand. People have lives and they have jobs and school and that factors into it. But if we grow as a parish, we have to think like that. That's how we're going to grow, and that's how we're going to give people these types of things, right? Like I see, like, for example, like the Lutheran church that was in Calhoun where I came from, right? They had a preschool. Why don't we have a preschool? Why don't we have a preschool? Why don't we have a homeschooling group? There's churches that they have those things, right? The Greeks are really good at this. The Greeks do Greek school, right? We'll make that a whole part of their thing. Why don't we have things like that? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Why don't we have things like that? Why do we make excuses and say we don't have that, we can't do that? And I think that's a big part of the thing about it, right? You know, the purpose, that's a purpose that we have to strive for as a community. Because that's going to keep those people in. Give them something where, like, to go back to the thing I said earlier about the SCA, right? People will change their names, and I know a few people who legally change their names to their character names. Okay, the names that they were role playing. Well, a lot of people, they become Orthodox, they get a saint name, right? You know, and some of them will legally change their names to that name, where they no longer, or they just want to be called that name. You know, from that moment on, they don't ever want to be called. And I don't. Oh, Anthony's a good example of this, actually. Anthony, that's not his legal name. You know, that's his baptismal name. Does anyone know his real name? I can't remember how to pronounce it. It's like something Shahad or whatever. He's going to laugh at this part. You know, like but everybody knows him as Anthony. You see what I'm saying? Right? Like, we do that too, right? We steal those kind of things. And you know what? I'll tell you right about that gives him purpose, having that as his name, being referred to and thought of only as that. You know? I only knew that because when we booked his flight for the elementary council, he had a different name I had to book on there, right? He doesn't exactly share it, you know? So that's not the point. I'm getting on a tangent here. But my point is why can't we steal what others do? And I use steal as in the sense of like, not in a mean, bad way, but like, give people that, right? Ministries. Ministries the second thing. You know, first purpose is live the faith, be an example of the faith. That'll be a big thing. But ministries. Lots of ministries. I'm always telling people, if you've got an idea, please share it with me. Send me an email. Talk to me at coffee or talk about, right? Like if you guys in your groups and stuff like that, when you're over at the hall, you know, you come up with ideas, come up with stuff. I'm all ears. That doesn't mean necessarily we're going to do all of them. It doesn't necessarily mean we'll do them right now. But think about things like that, you know? Like Craig and I were talking about this idea of doing like a kind of a, what was it, the dried food thing, Craig?
I'm sorry.
We were talking about doing this like freeze-dried food thing.
Yeah.
For people
No,
that are
I
in need.
didn't know I ever talked about this idea with you.
You had talked about it a few weeks ago. Before
Yeah.
you went up to DC, we talked
Yes.
about it. Right? You know, like that's what I'm talking about. You know, when I first got here, the idea was we were going to have a St. Christopher Society that was going to help people with rides in church. We're still going to resurrect that and get that going, but that's one of those things we are not there yet, right? 1 second. The bottom line is, if you have ideas, that's one way of giving people purpose. That's like giving people a job. You know, if you think of something and you encourage others, hey, Father says if you've got any ideas, he's all ears, right? That's going to be a big thing. So the first purpose is live the faith. The second one is ministry. I'm thinking of a third one, and that's where I'm going to leave it at. Anyone think of the third one would be? Jesse, maybe you have, since you wanted to say something.
Oh, you were talking about thinking of stuff to do, and Luke, Evan, and I wanted to start a sort of Bible study using the Orthodox Study Bible, so that like if we couldn't get you or anyone else, that we could still sort of have a concise study of the Bible instead of just coming to our own conclusions and stuff like that. So
well, that's what the Bible study on Sundays is supposed to be. That's what Anthony's class is. Oh. So that is already taken care of.
There you go.
So that's why we have his class for that. We have this class for another one, right? And eventually, this class is going to turn into a different type of thing. This is going to be very much oriented towards sessions and like a whole thing of something with an underlying kind of theme. Right? We're doing the parables. We're really theming this on evangelism, and his is the more overarching everything. You know, whatever the Sunday is, Bible study. Another example of that is I'm in the process of trying to get a Bible study going at GSU, at a coffee shop near GSU, so that's there, right?
Okay.
But those kind of, that's good. That's very good. Like thinking like that. That's the right way to think. There's a third one though that I was thinking of. I'll tell you, Andrew, looking at me like you have a guess.
Okay.
If you don't, I can move on.
Yeah, please move on.
So if purpose is living the faith and ministry, like having ministry in the parish, that's another thing with regards to the church that keeps the people. What do you do about the people already here?
I mean, you kind of police each other, or
No, not police. I wouldn't use the word police.
Tend to them.
Tend to
they're
them?
our community. We're supposed to be supporting them.
It's sort of a mixture of the first two.
Okay.
Living the faith, like you did with the candles, where I'm leading at with this, but ministry within the sense of it, right? As I'm talking about ministries that we do for the community to give people things to do in church, so that they pick us over other things. So I like to say, like, you have the option, it hurts me to say this, but, you know, watch a hockey game or go to church for a Bible study kind of a thing, right? Like, you gotta give people that option to make them want to come to the Bible study instead of watching a hockey game, right? That's part of it, but what about the people in the community? Combine the two of those together, what do you get with that third one? That's where I'm leading at. Thoughts? Come on, don't make me walk you through this. I need a breath for a second. I've done a lot of talking.
I'm trying. I got you. I'm coming to your aid. Isn't that kind of like some of the stuff we're doing with like the coffee hours and stuff like that? It gives us exposure, it gives us ministry, it gives people something to do, and it also gives us visibility.
Visibility, yeah. Those are all part of the ministry part, though.
Oh, shoot.
Gonna make me edit all this dead space out.
Yeah.
I don't want to edit anything. Just want to post the episode as is. I mean, I listen back to it, but then I go, oh, I don't want to edit that out. It'll sound weird. Can't think of anything for the third one?
Walk it to us.
Walk us to us?
Walk it to us. I
Yeah,
guess.
Father, I'm going to
Bring it to us. You know, you don't have to walk us to it.
So, within the community, let's take the Bible and the ministry, right? Learn. Learn what, like, your purpose, learn in the sense of learn what Orthodoxy really is. Yes. The ministries are important. Yes. Living the faith are important. But learn what that meant too. Like, learn what our theology is. You know, I'm kind of the wrong person to say this, because I have to tell people that I'm not really big on the idea of academics in the church. Not that I don't think that there's a place for it, right? But I feel like we oftentimes look at it as you're either academic or you're not. And I don't think that that's the mindset we have to have. I think you have to basically be everything. In the sense where you have to, yes, we come together, we have this class, we talk about stuff. It goes in 25 different directions, but it's always good and fruitful, right? Because it gives us a chance to sort of work through stuff and talk about stuff in a way that we never really talked about things. But I could easily get up here and I could talk just simply about, okay, here's what the parable, this is exactly what this father said, this is what this father said, and this is what this father said, and this is what this is to take on that. But you know what? Every single other person has done that already. So that's a little different thing that we do that's not what it is, but right? But you had said this with regards to, going through an Orthodox study Bible, right? And reading it from that perspective so you don't get off track, And I would say, what's one of the things that will help with that? What's the third purpose, or if you will, if we're going to call it like that, is learn your faith. Like, really learn your faith, right? My catechism really only requires that you read through the guide, come to the classes that you're able to come to, listen to the classes, but it also really just says come to a lot of church. Like, come to every Sunday liturgy. Like, that's how I determine. If I see somebody who hasn't been in church for a while, I have notes on my phone, on my notes, on my Apple Notes, that says I haven't seen this person in a while, or they haven't been coming consistently enough. They're not close enough to converting, right? Though there's others I go in and go, they're good. I could probably do it tomorrow, but I want to wait. There's a lot of different things. I don't really require that they know every single thing about the church. But I still think you need to know stuff. I still think it's important to know what the church teaches on things, right? I'm not expecting an academic. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want an academic, but I do want people to find their purpose and learning every aspect of what our faith is, right? Really delving into it, right? Because when you become Orthodox, to quote one of my other professors, Dr. Paul Meyendorf, he always used to say this comment of saying, there's no such thing as cradle Orthodox. There's only converts, right? He's a cradle, so am I. And he would say, because you spend the entirety of your life learning and converting and constantly converting, right? So you have to make part of your purpose the constant drive to learn. Now, those who are here, that's obviously the case, right? But you have to show the first part as the example, the second part as the ministry of this, of expanding it and telling people about it, right? To fill the third one. The first and the second fill the third one, right? The first and the second provide the third one. The third one is what's going to make you good at the first one. The third one's going to make you good at the second one. They all kind of work as this kind of cool little Trinity thing. That's completely unintentional, but in the sense of it, that's where it comes down to, is good community, good solid community that keeps the fish and such like that, has all three aspects of that. It doesn't have academics, but it does have people who know their faith, right? It has ministries in the sense of people have things to do outside of other things, and a choice, a good choice, a better choice, a proper choice. And it has people who are trying to become holy, who are trying to live the life of Christ, who are being examples of that, who want to be better, who want to be healthy. It's still full of all the bad fish, right? But it's a good fish. The good communities, the strong communities that see those things, and it's sort of like that the bad fish can't speak up. The little guppies trying to speak up, they can't, because they got all the crabs that are able to take over. I know that's a weird analogy, but that's what it boils down to. That's really what's going to drive growth in the parish. Is what's going to drive, ourselves, and ultimately that's going to be an aspect of our salvation. That's part of the salvation we work through, right? Is that when we envelop those three things, we can actually put ourselves before Christ and say, when He asks you, what's your defense? You can actually have a good defense. That's what it kind of comes down to. One of the aspects of our salvation is having a good defense before Christ at the second coming at the great judgment seat. If you have those three things, and those three things have done well for you, and you've built something with that, you can have no fear, really. I mean, you still have a little bit of fear because we're called to do that, but really, can you have fear? That's the question I would want you to take from all of this, is when we're all said and done. So that being said, any other questions on the matter? And then we'll end it, and I'll do a quick little Q&A on anything else.
I was going to say, we talked a whole lot less about the weeping and gnashing of teeth. I thought this was where that's going, but you put a positive spin on it, so I can...
Would you like me to talk about the weeping and gnashing?
Sure.
I mean, that's...
Yeah, you didn't expect me to say yeah.
Oh, man. Well, what do you want to say on it? And then I'll come up with something.
Sucks, man. Like, what am I supposed to say? It's boring. But, like these kinds of, the people who end up being the ones who gnash their teeth are sort of in a hole they dug for themselves, in a way. You know what I mean? There's no injustice in what's happening to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that. I'll run with that a little bit to what I said, right? About this whole idea of we want to foster good community. We want to foster a good and healthy. And we can't use, and I was sort of saying this when I was using the whole thing of a lot of churches would use the argument, right? I won't name any particular priests in general, but I will say there was one priest at one time said something to me that really irked me. And I hate to say that about another priest, but that's the only reason I'm keeping their name, right? And please forgive me for this, but, they had said, you don't need to do any kind of that kind of stuff. That's nonsense. Because if you just build a really big church, people will just jump on their own. And I was just kind of like, no, you can't do that. You can't just sit there and think if you just build it, they will come. That doesn't work. It works in movies, okay? That doesn't work in real life. People have to see that there's more than just a place that's like there. Because, a lot of communities die because there's nothing going on. Absolutely nothing going on, right? When I got to Colorado, there was barely anything going on in that parish, even though they had some good stuff going on, right? But it was when we really got involved in the community that we grew. We were involved in not just our Slavic Fest, which was already a community thing, but I was at every single ball game I could get to, right, of the kids' games, which is easier to do out there than it is here, But I was at those games, we participated in the county fair, we had somewhat of a coffee chat going on at a place that ended up closing down. We tried to do it, we just couldn't get it going because that was a very small town and things like that. But we would do things like that, and stuff like that. One of the reasons my wife became the preschool director at the Lutheran school was so that they could see us. They could see the church, right? And stuff like that. And like, we would say, it'd be like, oh yeah, that's Father Stephen's wife, and everyone knew who I was. Like, I used to tell everybody that I was Father Jack Sparrow because she knew who I was in town, kind of a thing. Like that was a part of it, in that sense. Because those communities that don't let people know who they are, they die away, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knew who St. Mary Holy Commission was in Calhoun Orthodox Church. They knew that church. If you ask somebody who the Catholic priest was, only maybe the Catholics that went to that church knew, right? If you asked who some of the other pastors they knew because they worked at the main school, but you asked who we were, they knew who we were, So the communities that say, oh, I'm sorry, we're just going to do services and hope for the best, those are the communities I look to and go, you're in for a rude awakening.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to pull this back and say this, okay? So another priest, this one I will name, Father John Driscoll, when I was coming out to visit here, we were talking about OSIP, and he was the president of OSIP at the time, and stuff like that. He said one of the reasons he became the president of OSIP was so that when he stands before God, he doesn't sit there and say, yeah, I retired as a priest and then I stopped working. It's like, no, I'm going to continue to work. Now, is he working in the capacity that he was as a parish priest? No, he didn't need to, right? He had done his good and faithful service, and there was nothing wrong with that, right? But he also felt compelled to say, I can't stand before God and say, yeah, I golfed for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
He's like, I left one ministry and went to another, right? Because he knows just how important it is that, if he takes that time off and just kind of falls away, he's violating the case. He's essentially allowing himself to be like, the ones who fall away or think, you know what, we don't need to do that, right? There's a lot of people who think, oh, we're good to go. We don't need to do that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you, they're in for a rude awakening, those who feel that way. And that's where the weeping and gnashing of teeth comes in, right? Because those people that will experience that, when Christ uses that imagery throughout the scriptures and stuff like that, he's using that imagery, and that's one of the reasons he speaks in parables, right? To make it very clear to them, make it very clear to the people, you don't know how important this actually is. Let me show you how important this actually is. Like, you think it's all roses and fantasy and all that, right? Like the world will tell you everything's wonderful and great. It's not. If you don't turn away from your sin, you only have yourself to blame, And that's why I put the positive spin on it in the sense of saying, look, I know how, I wouldn't even have used the words positive spin. I would have said more along the lines of, it's more of an urgent spin, right? I see it as very urgent, right? Like, Father Michael and I were talking about this the other day because, I told him, and I'll just say this, right? One of the things I struggle with is if somebody leaves the parish, leaves, especially if I'm the reason they left, it eats me up inside. It eats me up like you wouldn't believe, right? Because I feel like I failed them. I'm literally like, Obi-Wan on the cliff going, Anakin, I failed you, and stuff like that. Except for I'm also Anakin jumping up and getting my limbs chopped off, I have the high ground. I can put a hashtag Star Wars now in this. But it eats me up inside when I lose somebody, right? Because to me, I have to account for every single person in this parish. You only have to account for your sins. When I go stand before God, guess what? I have to sit there and go, man, I shouldn't have made fun of Nate so much. I don't make fun of Nate. We joke, we kid, we go back and forth. It's a whole banter thing. People are listening and think I'm mean to you. I'm not, But I will sit there and I might go, man, I should have been teaching Nate to be more holy. I should have been telling him to pray more. But instead, I decided to make call him the beardless one for our Pathfinder game, and maybe that turned him away from properly praying. I have to answer for that. Whereas he just has to sit there and go, I just gotta be nice to my wife and tell her she's right about everything. Kind of a thing. It's a little different, right? Because I don't have to just deal with Nate, but also have to deal with Luke, I have to deal with you. I have to deal with Guillermo. I have to deal with Craig. And I have to deal with my wife. And I have to deal with my daughter. I have to deal with every parishioner in this parish. And every person I've ever encountered with. And every person I've ever encountered with and I've ever been in charge of. Right? And likewise, this is one of the reasons, even though it's no secret, I've had gripes with, not gripes for like publicly, but every priest doesn't like things their bishop does, right? Also recognizes that the bishop also has to answer for all of you too. So that's one of the reasons why I have to sit there and go, yeah, I like the bishop even if I don't. I like the bishop, so let's not pretend like I don't. But, right, because they have to answer on top of that, They have to answer for all their parishes. So if there's 50 parishes in the diocese, and let's say 100 people at one of them, that's 5,000 people they have to deal with, or they have to answer for, where I have to just answer for 120, right? Hold on just a second. So that's why, for me, knowing that that's the case, the urgency is that we do that. Because I know, it's really, again, I'm going to go back to quoting Father John for a second, right? He says essentially, so to me all the time was, you're going to preach more to yourself than you preach to anybody else. And that's where because you're going to realize that people relate to that because they all struggle the same as you do, right? But that's essentially what it is. That urgency is because I don't want to have gnashing of teeth for myself. And I don't want that for any of you either. That's why it eats me up so inside when someone leaves, because I really take it seriously, I'm absolutely scared in that sense. And that's okay, It's a good scare. It's a good fear, When I hear the imagery of there'll be gnashing of teeth if you don't pick Jesus over everything else, I'm picking Jesus over everything else, If God said to me, I'll make you a deal. I'll give the Vikings a Super Bowl win for the next 5 years, and you get 5 Super Bowl wins, but you don't get to be saved, I'm going to sit there and say, make them terrible for the rest of my life. Okay? Even though I would be it'd be tempted to go, can we compromise on one? Kind of a thing. Even if he said nope, or even if he said, I'll give you one, I'd be like,
even if there was
one
good team member, would they win? Like Abraham about Lot.
Right,
he's
exactly.
God.
Exactly. Just like Abraham and Lot. It's that important. So the reason I don't spin it in the sense of focusing so much on that part, right? The gnashing of teeth. Gnashing. Is I didn't use the language, but the urgency is still there.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the real thing, right? Because if we don't do those 3 things I said, right? If we don't live as the church for those, be the good fish for those, so that we basically bury out, or rather, not bury out, what's the word I'm looking for?
Convert.
Not convert.
Change.
Not wash. Drown out.
There you go.
Drown out. Drown out the bad. Right? If we're overly good, we drown out the bad, right? If we don't have the ministry, if we don't, have the knowledge and education and represent what the church is, because we have to know that. I didn't even say this in the third one, but one of the reasons we need to know our faith is because people are going to come in asking questions too, right? All of you have asked questions at one time or another of things. People are going to come off the street and go, what do you believe on this? Right? I get asked questions all the time about what the church believes on stuff. That's just part of my job. But you should also know those things, is really what it was saying. Right? If we don't have those types of things, then that's what's going to happen to us, right? We're going to stand before God, and He's going to go, what did you do with your life? And we're going to go, I stood in church for 2 hours, and I kind of prayed, but I was also thinking about, what time the game is, and I got grocery shopping to do, and man, I really want to go back home and play a video game. I haven't played a video game in 3 months, so I really want to go play a video game right now. Oh gosh, that's not going to defense. That's not going to win you a case. That's not going to win you before Jesus. Jesus is going to look at you and go, I warned you. You decided. You chose to go there, right? You only have yourself to blame.
I was going to say you're discouraging a lot of people who are aspiring to be priests now, saying how they got that way. Although it's honest, to be fair.
No, I don't think so, because the thing is that that's something that's different than anyone else.
Sure.
There's no discouragement. Like the priesthood
Wow.
is
Joking.
right, but no. Let me just say this with regards to the priesthood on that, right? Because that could obviously be seen as that's kind of a discouraging thing, right?
Yeah.
But you want to know something though?
What?
When someone comes to you and says they want to join the church, that's why one becomes a priest. When they say they want you, because you know what that means? That means you have someone to defend, that can defend you, right? Because when I go up there and have to defend myself, I've got to have, Nate going on there going, man, he called me all these names, but you know what? He was the best priest I ever had. Or maybe he's going to go, you know what? He was the worst priest I ever had, but he got me to pray, and that's all that mattered. And Jesus is going to look at it and go,
Right.
he's in your corner,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Anyway. All right, anything else? And then we'll stop and we can just do some random questions. All right, let's stop and we'll